I have full confidence this video could be the most important video you ever watch. So put everything else aside and pay attention, because in this video I'm going to give you the full guide to improving your self-esteem, to feeling like the most valuable and important person in the room. And absolutely everyone, especially if you're like under the age of 30, because we're being hit the hardest, but absolutely everyone can benefit from this video and needs to watch a video like this. So let's go straight into it. This is what we're going to talk about in this video. First of all, what is self-esteem? Then we're going to talk about why so many people have low self-esteem these days, the effects, the handbrakes, and then we're going to go into boosting your self-esteem. But before we get into the main video, guys, definitely check out my ebook in the description below. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. And this is actually my second channel where I make long form guides on. So if you want to check out my main channel, I'll have it linked below as well. But without further ado, let's go. So first of all, what actually is self-esteem? What does it even mean? Because I think there's very few people that I've actually heard define self-esteem properly. A lot of people get self-esteem and ego and all these other things like mixed up together because they seem kind of similar. Self-esteem is basically your perception of self-worth. So it's how much you like yourself, how easy it is to have hope for the future, how confident you are in being authentic with yourself, and how resilient you are against negative comments. If you can answer questions like that very positively, then the odds are you have high self-esteem. Unfortunately, most people can't answer those questions very positively at all because they don't have high self-esteem. But just to explain a few things in there, what I mean by how much hope you have for the future is, let's say you're working on a project, maybe you're exercising or you're building a business. It literally could be any kind of long-term project. If you find it difficult to have hope for the future, you have a lot of negative thoughts, you don't think you can you don't think investing time and effort now is going to pay off, you can't see yourself ever being one of those successful people that you admire, then you probably have a self-esteem issue. So that would be a good indicator that you have low self-esteem. Other things are just how confident you are in being authentic, how resilient you are against negative comments. Like if somebody says something mean, does it offend you or do you not care? That's a very good indication of your self-esteem. The biggest difference between self-esteem and ego, I'll just define that. I'll explain the difference really quick because a lot of people get it confused, but ego is kind of like how you view your capability and what you're entitled to. So someone with a massive ego might think they're hyper capable, and they could actually be true. They might be very good at it, but they will see themselves as hyper capable at a certain thing. You see this a lot. I don't know if you've seen Novak Djokovic in tennis, but like things like that, and a lot of professional fighters, they have a huge ego when they go into the ring or anything like that, because those examples are probably justified, but they realize that they're extremely capable in that area, and they also believe they're entitled to whatever they're working towards. The biggest difference between ego and self-esteem is that ego is not always, but it's often subject specific. So for example, you might have a big ego on the sporting field, you might have a big ego on YouTube if you've got a huge YouTube channel, something like that, whereas self-esteem is generally across the board. Someone with high self-esteem doesn't really have high self-esteem in this area and low self-esteem in that. Yes, you can have like a fear of heights or like an anxiety for something, you can have that, but generally high self-esteem is across the board, ego is subject specific. That is the difference. So without self-esteem, you become, and this is kind of a lot of the bad things about, people these days, without self-esteem, you become hyper-dependent on validation and you're easily hurt by other people. So when I say hyper-dependent on validation, because you can't internally validate yourself, and we'll talk about a lot about that in this video, you basically become dependent on what other people say, for better and for worse. Not really for better. I just mean like if you're dependent on people being nice to you to feel good about yourself, otherwise you start to lose your self-worth, and you're also easily hurt by other people. When somebody makes fun of you or is rude to you, think about yourself for a second. If somebody's rude to you at work or a friend or anything like that, do you ruminate on that for a bit? When somebody does something dumb on the road when you're driving, do you think about that for the next few hours or days? You ruminate on things like that? If you do, that is a sign that you probably have low self-esteem, because it's not normal. Well, unfortunately it is normal, but it shouldn't be normal for you to just ruminate on bad experiences and things like that for days and days or anything like that. That's a sign of low self-esteem, because you're easily hurt and you have to constantly think things over. It can be a sign of other things as well, like neuroticism, but generally people who are highly neurotic have low self-esteem. Low emotional frequency is another big part of low self-esteem. So obviously someone with high self-esteem is going to be happier more of the time than somebody with low self-esteem. Low emotional frequency just means you feel a lot of low frequency emotions like shame, guilt, things like that. You very rarely feel like flow state or just like more positive emotions. It's more easy for you to sink into negative feelings, and you do a lot of negative self-talk like we talked about before, where you don't encourage yourself or anything like that. These people generally have poor relationship quality and a poor work ethic. They don't really care about They don't care as much about their career because they don't think they're entitled to anything, and they don't think that they're good enough for a promotion. They don't work on themselves because they just have low self-esteem. Like I've pretty much given you all the reasons already. And just poor relationship quality is kind of like a symptom of everything we've talked about. A lot of the people, I think the worst people in relationships have low self-esteem. The higher your self-esteem is, the higher the combined self-esteem of the two people in a relationship is, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship or a professional relationship, the better the relationship's going to be. When you've got two low self-esteem people, at best it'll just be like unproductive, and they're both just kind of, losers because they don't really hold themselves accountable. At worst, they're going to be fighting and tearing each other down, which we will talk about that in a second. I mentioned this a little bit in my negative people video, which I definitely recommend you check out. But I think the concept of people tearing each other down is terrible, but it's also very, very interesting to look at on a psychological level, because it happens to everyone and very few people have an understanding of it. And then procrastination, I'm not going to explain that. That's pretty straightforward. So, part one of the video, the low self-esteem crisis. Now that we've outlined what low self-esteem looks like and what self-esteem is, let's talk about how it's a pretty big deal today. And I think in a way it's always been a big deal. It's always been very important. But the reason it's a big deal today is because almost everyone our age has low self-esteem. And I'm going to prove that. When I say almost everyone, I can't seem to put a number on it mentally. Like, I try and think about what percentage of people, is it, 80%, is it like 99.9%? I just kind of bounce around between what percentage of people I think it is, depending on what mood I'm in. But I think we could all agree that the vast majority of people have low self-esteem these days. Even a lot of the people who are, you might say, oh, but I know these people who are loud and very talkative and they seem to be confident. A lot of those people also have low self-esteem. Like, I know people like that. I know, do I want to give personal examples? Like, I know I'll give you a personal example because I'm not saying anyone's names, but like, I know people who were, the loud theatre kids in my grade, and now they have an OnlyFans. And I know people who were always, very talkative, and I know other people who push people around, and you would think, oh, he's the tough guy, and now he does drugs and that kind of, like, I know people who you might think have high self-esteem because they kind of act like it, but I can see through it. I've always been a very good judge of character. I can see who has low self-esteem, who meets the criteria on the previous page, who doesn't like themselves, who gives up easily, who isn't confident in being themselves, who isn't resilient because they go all pouty when someone says something rude to them, who has to bite back at people to make themselves feel good. I understand these things perfectly. So, I'm telling you, most people our age have low self-esteem. And although this is hard to see on a spreadsheet, you can't really see, I guess you can see statistics on depression and mental illness and stuff. You can't really see a statistic on low self-esteem. It's like an opinion-based thing. You can look at other data and form a professional opinion, but yeah. Although you can't see it on a spreadsheet, this does cause huge problems. Having low self-esteem is not good, and I'll explain why. So most people... Oh, we're jumping ahead. That's the next page. That's going to be probably the most important part of this video. Most people with low self-esteem are destructive rather than productive. And the reason is because the lower your self-esteem is, the easier it is to fall into the destructive rather than productive sort of behavior pattern. So by productive, I mean you're growing, basically. You're doing things to self-improve. You're delaying gratification. If you don't know what instant gratification versus delayed gratification is, instant gratification is basically bad habits that make you feel good immediately, like eating junk food and scrolling, but they don't really do anything for you. Delayed gratification is things that aren't necessarily as pleasurable right now, like exercising, reading, eating healthy, but they're better for you in the future and they make you a better person. Learning skills would also be an example of delayed gratification. The lower your self-esteem is, the easier it is to do instant gratification, which is the bad one, the one you don't want to do. And that's why all of the people who do the most... I talked about this in another fantastic video that I'll link below. It's from my main channel. But I talked about how, how when you think of things that are fun, you probably think of the high dopamine things like junk food. You think of a lot of bad habits like junk food, watching movies, playing video games. Those are all like the fun habits, the things that are easy to do. However, when you look at the people who do those things the most, they're not having fun at all. The people who do those fun habits the most are often the most depressed, the most lonely, the most purposeless, etc. And that's because they have low self-esteem. It leads to this pattern of bad behavior. So, And yeah, this next sentence is completely true. They aren't improving their lives. They're just hyperstimulating themselves. If you want to learn a little bit more about hyperstimulation, my ebook is linked below. I talk all about that and the other two things. Hyperstimulation is one of the three main things that are destroying our generation and turning us into a generation of subhumans. So definitely check that out if you're interested. But the final thing I will say on the low self-esteem crisis is that people with I'll say one other thing actually, but people with low self-esteem are dangerous. Like, there's a lot of talk. I'm going to be real with you for a second, right? This is me giving my hardcore opinion on things, which some people are not going to like, but I'd like to think that we can be adults about this. I think the modern narrative of, being high self-esteem and confident, we see this a lot with men. They try and say, toxic masculinity, and, they try and paint being confident and having ambition and these kind of things as being a bad thing. I think that idea encourages very, very bad behavior, because when I look at the worst possible people in society, and I'm sorry if this, bringing up this kind of stuff hurts anyone, but I'll make it quick. The school shooters, the, people in jail, the abusers, all of the worst possible people in society, none of them have high self-esteem. They all have low self-esteem, and that's why I'm so passionate about this. Because even you can go to the alcoholics, the drug addicts, the bullies, there's levels to this. They're not as bad as, the mass shooters and stuff, but you get the picture, right? If you look at the worst people in society, they are all low self-esteem. And sure, some of them maybe become drug addicts where they're only really hurting themselves. It's still not great for society, but other people become extremely dangerous and they go and shoot up a school or something because their self-esteem is so low, they don't care about themselves, they don't think they're going to achieve anything, that they go and do that. Now, obviously that's an extreme example, but it's actually not an extreme example. It's an extreme case of it's an extreme example of a common case is what I should say. The common case being low self-esteem, which is very prevalent these days, and it's not good. So we need to fix that. That's one of the reasons why I'm making this video. As far as why more people have low self-esteem these days, we'll talk about that in, I think, about here. If you're wondering, if you thought I skipped that, I didn't. We're going to talk about that in a second. So before we get to that, let's discuss the self-image quadrant. And this is, I think, the most interesting part of this whole video. I've mentioned this in one previous video, I think the last video on this channel, which was called how to deal with negative people. Extremely important video. I go a lot more into depth in that video, but I'm going to still explain it here. I'm just going to make it quick. I'm going to give you the 30-second version. So basically the self-image quadrant breaks down people into 4 types of people, technically 5 because this quadrant's split in 2, but we're just going to say it's a quadrant, 4 groups, and it uses 2 axes. So self-esteem, high self-esteem versus low self-esteem. The higher self-esteem you are, you move up here. And coping mechanisms. So we talked about destructive versus productive on this slide. We break it down on this axis by how destructive or productive you are. I know I said people with low self-esteem are more prone to destructive behavior, and that is certainly true. However, you can have low self-esteem and make a change in your life. Kind of like a lot of people who might be watching this video where you decide to actually be more productive. The opposite is also true, although it's rare. You can see people, with high self-esteem that are being incredibly destructive, like, maybe like the Conor McGregor type people who become like go on a partying, binge after they win a few fights and they have a fall from grace where they're no longer as good because they were engaging in destructive behavior. So here are the 4 quadrants. The productive low self-esteem side is where a lot of people start off. They don't really, they don't have very high self-esteem, but they're doing the good habits. They're watching educational content, they're going to the gym, they're reading and stuff, and they're making themselves into better people. And of course, as I said before, if you're on the productive side, you're going up. So these people in here will end up in here. That's good news, right? And then of course, you've got the high achiever side, which is high self-esteem productive. That's where all these people end up. These are the people that have been on self-improvement for years. I'm very proud to say I'm in this category. They've built up a lot of skills, they like themselves, and they're still being productive and becoming better people. They have a student mindset, and they're maybe even teaching others, which is where we all want to be in this section. Then on the other side, we've got the low self-esteem section, and this is where most people fall into this quadrant here. It's not like 25% in each quadrant. This is where most people go. So in the low self-esteem destructive section, you've got the 2 types of destructive people, which is the self-sabotager, who's just kind of, they're probably, nice to you, but they're they just, they have terrible self-esteem and they just tear themselves down. They're not really mean to other people. And then you have crabs. The reason they're called crabs is because when you put crabs in a bucket, if one of them tries to escape, the other crabs that are its friends will pull it back in, so they won't actually let it escape. That's like a lot of people. It's probably like a lot of friends you have where they just kind of tear you down. They say mean things. They don't like the fact that you're improving as a person, and so they have to make you feel worse. That's what crabs are. So those people are obviously both destructive. One is to themselves, one is to others, although they're both kind of destructive to themselves and they're not going anywhere because they're in the destructive category. And then you've got kind of the dark horse, the weird one up here, which is the fall from grace. To be in this category, you kind of have to achieve a lot, like a lot of, athletes and celebrities, and then maybe they take a lot of drugs, like the Macaulay Culkins, the Conor McGregors. I don't really know if he's made a comeback, but like he went on a drinking binge and he got beaten up by Khabib. Other actors that, or maybe NBA stars that get someone pregnant and then now they have to pay millions a month and their career's kind of over. Like the people, the really high achievers that have a huge fall from grace and then they start engaging in destructive behavior and they make their way back down here, probably to the self-sabotager category, or maybe they're so famous that they still kind of are at the bottom of this category and they stay there forever. But yeah, that's kind of the weird one. Hopefully that makes perfect sense to you now. If you have any questions, comment below, or you're welcome to add me on Instagram and shoot me a message. I talk to everyone that messages me, and yeah, I'm happy to help you guys. What I'm going to talk about now is something I didn't talk about in the previous video, which is the relationships between each of the quadrants. And this is extremely important because before we can talk about how you can actually improve your self-esteem and what is causing bad self-esteem, I want to talk about the relationships between these types of people because it's very, very interesting. And I think if you're watching this kind of content, you're actually interested in this sort of intellectual stuff. So I've color coded the arrows. Red means interaction, so that means it's somebody's like saying or doing something to a different type of person. For example, you've got the high achievers who motivate and inspire these like the people that are in the grind. I don't know why I didn't put the word here, but just pretend it's there. And then you've got movement, which is actually like someone moving between the categories. So obviously the people who are here for long enough will move up to this category, as I did, because that's just where you end up. So yeah, so let's go through it. So let's start with the category probably almost all of you are in, which is this one here. The people who are not necessarily very high self-esteem, but they're doing the good habits and they're actually improving as people, which I take my hat off to you. That's the thing you should be doing when you're here. So if you look at the relationship between you and your friends who are maybe trying to tear you down, not all of your friends hopefully, but a lot of people have friends who, as soon as they start trying to make something of themselves, their friends start tearing them down because they're insecure. If you want to know why that is, by the way, I'll link my video below in the description for you to check out on negative people. But basically, the crabs, the red means interaction, remember, the crabs are trying to sabotage you and you hurt them by existing. You're not actually doing anything wrong, it's just because you intimidate them by trying to become better and they don't like that. Again, you're going to have to watch the full video to fully understand that. A lot of people in this category will try and convert their friends onto self-improvement. You'll probably try and do that to the self-sabotagers. It may or may not work. Usually it doesn't. The self-sabotager is of course just self-sabotaging themselves, and they're also usually people pleasers because they're not mean like the crabs. If you go back to this category again, the high achievers are motivating and inspiring people like you, and you're working to move up into that category. If you become complacent or arrogant, you move into the category of high self-esteem, destructive behavior, the fall from grace, and then eventually, if you stack enough losses, you'll move down from this category. That's basically the relationships between all those quadrants, and if you want to screenshot any of that, I'd highly recommend you do, by the way, so definitely go and do that. But now that we've gone through how different types of people react, let's talk about the handbrakes to self-esteem and what's causing all this, mental, like just bad kind of mental spaces for a lot of people our age. So the first thing to address here is going to be social media. That's definitely a huge one when it comes to self-esteem. And it's not really for one or two reasons. It's for like at least 5 that I've put here, and there's probably more. So the first thing we're going to address here is upward comparison. That's basically when you see people who are just better than you and everything, like they, have the amazing physique, or they're, like if you're a male, it's probably like awesome physique. If you're a girl, it's like they're very, very beautiful. They've got the money, the status, the lifestyle, that kind of thing. And it's just like you're constantly exposed to people who have extreme lives, and often they make their lives look 5x what they actually are just for views, because we like seeing extreme things. We don't just want to watch the same old boring stuff. And that kind of upward comparison does have the capacity in some cases to be good. For example, if you watch a lot of fitness content, that could actually be good because it's motivating you to become a better person. Unfortunately, most of the upwards comparison, and I've noticed this seems to be the case particularly with women, they seem to not, and the data seems to back that up as well, with more girls, having mental illnesses and social media addictions than boys. But a lot of people can't cope with most upward comparisons. It's just not good for their mental health to constantly be seeing people day in, day out who are better than them at everything. It's just not good. There is a way to motivate people, but that has to be done in a very specific way. And unfortunately, most of the content on social media doesn't happen to be that in that way at all. An example of upward comparison that would actually be good is maybe like, I'm in pretty good shape, right? So I'm planning on making a video soon on how to get into great shape. That would actually be, me putting pictures like this is actually fine because I'm explaining to you how I got so strong. I think I was like training arms that day. Look at my fucking arms, they're huge. I would be explaining to you how to actually achieve what I've achieved, and that would benefit people. So that would be an example of something on social media that's actually okay for helping people, but most of it isn't. You've also got external conditioning, which is basically, we talked about external versus internal validation before, where people with low self-esteem are dependent on people like, being nice to them for their own sense of self-worth. You can actually feel kind of like good and have a lot of self-worth occasionally as someone with low self-esteem. Maybe, for example, I remember when I was in primary school, I always had probably decent self-esteem, but it was like sort of in the middle back then. I remember I got the main part in like the school play, and then I also, won a few competitions that year. So for a lot of that year, I actually did have high self-esteem in air quotes, but I didn't actually have high self-esteem. I was just kind of amped up for a lot of that time because I won a lot of things and I had people, it's kind of cringe because it was in primary school. But I think it's a good example as someone who didn't have the highest self-esteem back then, but I did feel good for a lot of that year, not because I had high self-esteem, but because other people were kind of, like pumping me up. That sounded weird, but you know what I mean. And then of course, when that all faded, I went back to normal because I wasn't internally validated. The thing about social media is that it conditions you to be reliant on external validation and external kind of stimulus, because when you're constantly watching short form content of people with the best lives and, the most money and all these other things, it just kind of programs your brain to be very receptive to those things. And then as soon as you're not seeing them anymore, you kind of just start to feel worse. I don't really know how to explain it, but I've seen it. That's definitely true. The people who consume a lot of like short form content of people living very nice lives, especially those people who don't actually do anything to improve their own lives, which is most of them, they just feel very, very unsatisfied in their lives, and it kind of links back to upward comparison. There's also FOMO, fear of missing out. Like, nobody wants to see pictures of stuff they weren't invited to. The interesting thing is, this is quite interesting. Even things that you didn't even want to go to. Like, for example, say someone has a party and you don't care that you it sounds like a bit of cope, like you're pretending you didn't care. But say someone has a party, you see photos, you genuinely don't care. Like, you wouldn't have gone if you were invited. But a lot of the time you still actually feel kind of bad that you weren't invited, even though you're like, it's so strange, isn't it? Because even though you might think, I literally wouldn't have gone to that, I'm not interested at all, it's just the fact that you weren't invited kind of makes you feel a little bit bad. It's so weird. I think it might be like an evolutionary thing, like some kind of, tribal, like if you got kicked out of the tribe, obviously that was kind of like a death sentence, and it's probably like some kind of thing that relates back to that, even though we don't live in that kind of society anymore. I just put that there because I think it's very interesting. And then of course, if you actually do miss out on something you did want to go to, that's not going to feel great. Mental illness is through the roof, as we know, because of social media, because of all of these things, because of addictions and God knows what. And then cyberbullying, not going to go into that one, pretty straightforward. Modern culture is the next main reason why self-esteem is so bad. And I've just realized I've actually written tons on this page, so I'm going to try and sort through it a bit quicker, because you probably don't want as much of a breakdown of each of these things. If you do, again, check out my book, because I actually talk about all of this and more in, I think, the first chapter of the book. So yeah, you should definitely check it out. But modern culture is basically the word I use for all of the things I hate about modern culture. We could talk about tall poppy syndrome, where, if you don't know what that is, it's where the tall poppy gets cut down because it stands out from the rest. It basically relates back to crabs and how your friends will and other people will tear you down because you're trying to be better and you're trying to improve yourself. There's also weakness culture where people, demand handouts and they wear their weaknesses on their chest like badges of honor, and they don't actually try and improve themselves, and they just talk about how weak they are and being fat's okay and all these other things. I hate that about modern culture, and I think we need to get rid of that desperately. And then just poor mental health knowledge. A lot of people's mental health recommendations are just terrible. Like anything from, pills will make you happy to, it's okay. People who say it's okay to not be okay and then also do nothing about it. It is okay to not be okay, but you have to actually start trying to make your life better. If you don't like your life, that's not magic. It's not COVID. You didn't just contract it from a sneeze. The reason you don't like your life is actually a report card. It's a scoreboard of your life, because you're not doing good things. If you don't like your life, there's a reason for that. It's probably because, like, I see people who say that they're unhappy that I know, and then it's like, of course, like you're extremely, I don't actually say this to them, but it's like you're extremely overweight, or you stay inside all day. It's like, not even like murderers have to stay inside all day. Even they get time out to socialize and work out, and you don't do that. So why are you surprised that you're not happy? Things like that. And then of course you've got the education system, which only praises academic intelligence. I talk about that in my book too. Instead of rewarding all the other types of intelligence, and it punishes failure, it makes kids feel fear, which I think leads to low self-esteem. And then you've got hyperstimulation as well, which is the final thing. Basically, when you're doing a lot of stimulating habits, like, the social media, the junk food, all of the things we have these days that are incredibly overstimulating, when you do those things all day, every day, your brain actually does a thing called neuroadaptation, where it becomes less sensitive to those tasks, which means you need to do more of those tasks to release the same amounts of dopamine. And then when you don't do those tasks, your dopamine is actually lower because your brain is, you're no longer as sensitive to those things, which I think it makes doing ordinary tasks more difficult. If you ever look at someone who's addicted to short form content and then you try and get them to read a book, they literally can't do it. It's too hard. And that's because dopamine, when you have a lack of dopamine, it actually worsens your mood and your focus, and it leads you to do more bad habits and instant gratification. So yeah, that's very interesting, I think, to think about. But let's move on to part 2, which is boosting your self-esteem. The first thing you need to understand is what we mentioned before, which is external dependence. If you are externally dependent as a person, you are going to have a very, very tough life. And of course, it's not binary. It's not like you're either external or internal. It's a sliding scale between the two. And we want to be as internally dependent or internally satisfied, internally validated is the word I've written down, as possible, because that doesn't mean you can't enjoy external validation. You can still feel good when someone compliments you, but the more internally validated you are, the less sort of vulnerable you are to what other people say that might be rude about you. So when you are probably dependent on validation right now and you're easily hurt by criticism, this is evolved social behavior. The reason most people are this way is because I think just evolutionarily, if people didn't like you and they said mean things about you, that increased your chances of being kicked out of the tribe, which is basically a death sentence. So if you think about all of the cavemen and stuff who actually did manage to survive, they stayed in the tribe and they passed their genetics down, those were all the people who learnt social cues. They learnt that it was important to care about what other people thought so that they could survive, and as such they did survive. The problem nowadays is that that's leading to anxiety and it isn't really actually helping anyone at all. Obviously he still needs social cues, right? I'm not arguing against that, and you still should care to an extent what people think about you, obviously to a point. Like it is important to consider what other people think about you. However, you shouldn't be so easily hurt by criticism that when some dickhead says something mean about you or someone cuts you off in traffic, that you ruminate about that for days. That's not good. You shouldn't be doing that. So what you need to do is get to the point where you can internally validate yourself. And this is easier said than done, but I'm going to walk you through it. So the first thing you need to do is to become a person who's better at internally validating yourself is to just practice authenticity, practice achievement, purpose, and hope. So I'll give you an example with me right now. This channel and my main channel, which I have way more videos on and way more subscribers, I try and be extremely authentic on that. And what I've noticed is the more authentic I am, the more I put pictures like this up, the more I talk about things that interest me and give my opinion and give personal stories and stuff, I actually feel better as a person because I'm living to myself. I'm being, I'm being purposeful. I'm doing the things that I actually enjoy doing and I think are important to the world. And that raises my self-esteem because I'm teaching my brain that I don't have to do the things that I think other people like. I can actually be myself and it makes me feel better. And other people actually happen to like that because we're actually not that different from each other. There are whatever problem you're going through right now are probably 1,000 other people are going through at this very moment, and millions have gone through it before. So we're really not that different from each other. Everyone's still unique, but the pieces that make us us are not necessarily as unique as we think. Everyone else often has similarities to us. So try and be as authentic as possible, and it's sort of like a muscle. The more you do it, the more comfortable you feel doing it, the better you get at it, and you'll just feel happier overall. The next thing you need to do is achievement, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But just having purpose and hope is extremely important for internal validation, and this sort of relates back to Stoicism. If you haven't heard of Stoicism before, I can't remember who invented it. Was it Seneca or Marcus Aurelius, or it could have been neither of them? I'm not sure. Stoicism is a really important word. It's sort of like a Greek philosophy. It originally was a Greek philosophy, I think, and it basically means to not care about external events and to not stress about them and to only exercise control over yourself. So for example, say someone T-bones your car, for example. I said it for example twice, there must be something wrong with me. Say someone T-bones your car. It wasn't your fault, nothing happened, you're not hurt, but it sucks because now your car's been hugely dented and maybe it needs to be towed. That's not good. However, the person who isn't a Stoic would stress about that, they would unnecessarily stress, they get angry, they maybe even scream and lead to road rage, and they just feel way, way worse. The Stoic person would look at that and go, well, I didn't have any control over that, I can't turn back time, I'm just going to do the best that I can do, I'm going to control everything that I possibly can, and if I can't control it, I'm going to forget about it. If that person drove off and you never see them again, and there's no cameras or anything, there's nothing you can do about it. If someone T-bones your car, right, and you have no idea who did it because they did it while your car was parked, maybe in the middle of nowhere, maybe not T-boned, maybe like someone smashed a window of your car, and there's no cameras, there's literally nothing you could possibly do to figure out who did it. The non-stoic would stress about that. The truly stoic and emotionally intelligent person wouldn't stress about that at all. And I know that sounds weird, but it's actually not, because it's not productive stress. The only stress that's actually okay is like productive stress when you're preparing for like a martial arts tournament or something like that. If you're just going to stress because someone smashed a window of your car and there's literally nothing you can do about it apart from just go and get it fixed, then that's the only thing you should focus on. Literally just go and fix it. You shouldn't unnecessarily stress yourself, and you just need to have hope and remember that you're not dead. Nobody's cut one of your arms off. And so there's really no reason to worry. Nothing, it's like it costs money, but who cares? Like, we're all going to die one day. There's no reason to worry about stupid things like that and make yourself feel worse. Just go and fix the problem. Focus on what you can actually control. So as far as achievement goes, almost at the end of the video, guys, let's talk about setting goals and stacking wins. So, I already mentioned that I was going to link this video below. It actually is important because I was just about to bring it up again, and then I remembered I've already mentioned the other video I made. But I made a video where I talked about how I had this conversation with one of my co-workers, and she just didn't have any goals at all, which I'm not going to be rude to her. Like, she can do whatever she wants, but it's not a good way to live your life at all. And unfortunately, 99% of people have no goals. Actually, I was talking yesterday, obviously this video is not going to come out today on the day I'm making it, so yesterday's relative. I was talking yesterday on the 28th of September to someone else at work, and I was asking him what goals he has, and he was sort of like making a joke out of it. Like, he said his goal was to not die, his goal was to like go for one walk, like he was being silly. But I sort of saw through that, and eventually was serious, and I could see that he also had no goals, and he's about, how old is he? Like, I think he's 15 years older than me. The girl was the same age as me, but he's a bit older than me. And I was just sort of disappointed because my worldview that most people don't have goals, it's just being confirmed and confirmed and confirmed again. And like, I actually don't want to be right anymore. I want to talk to someone who I think doesn't have any goals, and I want to be pleasantly smacked in the face. I want to be pleasantly surprised when they actually do have very well thought out goals. So I am disappointed in a lot of people because it's not really that funny to say that if I ask you what your goals are, maybe someone might have very personal goals, but he didn't. It's not really that funny to say, oh, my goal is to not die. Like, is it really that funny to say that? It's like it's a little bit haha giggles, like it's a little bit funny. But I think it's more sad that you just don't have any goals at all for the rest of the year or for the rest of your life. No goals. I have tons of goals. I will be the Prime Minister one day. I don't care. That's another lesson on self-esteem. I'm completely authentic. I'll say any goal that I have, and I don't give a shit what anyone says. But most people aren't like that, and that really isn't a good thing. So don't be one of these 99% of people who just don't have any goals. What you need to remember is that goals, where were we? Goals steer you towards delayed gratification and self-improvement. Not having goals steers you towards instant gratification and destructive behavior that lowers your self-esteem and makes you a worse person. So goals literally make you a better, higher self-esteem and happier person. You need to have some goals. So the actionable step now is, you can do this after the video if you want, I give you permission, but it's to get a pen. And the reason I said that is because I know of some people who on my main channel listen to my videos in the car. I'm not gonna make you pull over, but yeah. The actionable step is to get a pen and paper and journal on what you'd like to achieve in a year. So just write about anything. It doesn't matter how unrealistic or silly it is. Just write about the kind of person you want to become. You can even write about the kind of person you want to be 10 or 20 years from now. Just write about the future and what you actually want for yourself. And I think what you'll find is, once you be honest with yourself and you figure out what you like about yourself and what you want to achieve and what you don't like about yourself, if you're being honest, you'll actually start to get an idea in your head of where you want to be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, 2 years from now, and you can start to set some goals. So I know for me personally, at the start of the year, I set a few goals. One of them was to move to Thailand by the end of the year, which I think I will be able to do. And then I set a few other goals as well, which I won't go into. But yeah, you can literally just set goals. You can even message me on Instagram and we can talk about that, and I can help you set goals if you want, because I'm such a nice person. But yeah, you need to have some goals. And then what you can do once you have goals for the end of the year is you can break them down into monthly goals, so you can break them into weekly goals. So if your goal is to get in better shape for the year, your goal at the end of this month might be to go to the gym 10 times, and your goal at the end of this week could be to go to the gym for the first time. Something like that, if you get what I mean. And the final thing I'm going to tell you is that again, I'm going to tell you two more things. Whenever I say final thing, there's always a lot more to say. What I mean by stacking wins, because I realize I haven't actually explained what that is, it basically means being conscious of the things that you've achieved in your life. So a lot of people haven't really achieved anything in their life. Some other people have achieved things, but they don't actually think they're worthy of saying that they can do those things. They have a thing called imposter syndrome, which you might have heard of, where they just don't really believe that the things they've done are actually that exceptional. And that's really bad. So what you need to do is stack wins. You need to start by doing things and setting goals and achieving them. Doing things that actually make you like yourself, and then being aware of them as well, which is why journaling on the things that you've achieved, and self-esteem journaling can be a good thing as well. But the final thing I will remind you of is self-esteem. This is the mentality you need to have. Self-esteem is a report card for your life. If you have low self-esteem, that isn't something magical. It's not a disease you've contracted. Like, there's so much crap these days where people take absolutely... I'll tell you another story, actually, if you're still here, because I think it's interesting. This was like years and years ago. I think I was in year 9, which is like, if you're American, that would be what? Freshman year, I think. Yeah, something like that. I don't care. I was about 15 at the time. So years ago, and I remember I was just walking to the shops with some friends, my friend, his girlfriend, and my other friend, and all three of them, they weren't bad people, but they were not like the best people. I didn't really hang out with them again after that, but they were just talking about how they were depressed, and what the other guy who didn't have a girlfriend agreed that he was just kind of like, he's depressed. It was just like his life. And even though I hadn't, read a lot of books on this or anything like that, I was starting to wake up to these things, and at a very young age, and I just thought, like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why are you living your life as a depressed person where you're just like smiling, like, yeah, I'm kind of depressed as well? Like, isn't that like a disgusting, grotty way to live your life? Again, I'm not demonizing anyone with depression or mental illness. It's a very real thing that people face. But these kids, these people that were my age, were like smiling, saying, yeah, I'm depressed, I kind of like don't really like my life, and that was kind of like cute, and they were kind of like bonding over it. And like, some people would go, oh, that's so good, they're bonding. No, you shouldn't bond with people who have things wrong with them. That makes you a worse person. You shouldn't do that. The only time you should bond with people when you both have something wrong with you is when you're going to fix it. Like, if you have some other friend and neither of you are very fit and you don't like that, you can bond over that by going to the gym. That's the exception. You can bond by doing the good habit. Don't bond. That's a great lesson, by the way. Bond with someone who's bad at something like you. You're both bad at something. Bond with them by doing the good habit together. That is how you should bond. Don't bond with some other dickhead by doing a bad habit together. Don't bond with someone else who has low self-esteem by going, yeah, I have low self-esteem, that's okay, let's play video games and, not like our lives and let's like hate women, or they were just doing dumb, like I don't participate in any of that shit. That's why I stopped being friends with them. But they kind of just went down the fucking incel path. Like they're just not good people. Not all of them, one of them does. I can't really explain it because I'm not going to tell you. I need to use names to be clear who I'm talking about. But the point is, they went down they're not doing really anything with their lives. I'm in a fantastic place in my life and I don't stand for any of those things that they're doing. So the point of that is you need to remember that your self-esteem and your self-image is a report card for your life. If you have very high self-esteem, if you're in this category here, remember what we talked about before. You only end up in this category by being in this category and being productive for a long time. If you're here, that is a report card. Your self-esteem is a report card for the fact that you've been doing the good, productive things for a long time. And if you end up in here with low self-esteem, that is a report card because you've been doing bad habits and you're not doing things that are good for you, okay? So you need to remember that and actually accept some responsibility. I hate this like modern kind of silly weakness culture where we don't take responsibility for our own lives. No, your feelings are a report card and you have to remember that or you're going to live a very, very difficult life and nobody's going to come to save you. But guys, that is the video. Thank you for watching. Make sure you check out my ebook in the description. Add me on Instagram because I respond to all my messages. Hit the subscribe button. Check out my main channel. Have a good day and do something productive with your life or I will find you. I know where every single fucking one of you live. So don't think that I don't. Good luck.